many people might be surprised to find out that actually Chinese people do like Trump.
This is Cyrus Janssen, an American who lived in Shanghai and Hong Kong for 10 years and now hosts a popular YouTube channel about China. Cyrus shares his insights on what Trump's victory could mean for China-US relations, whether a shift to the global south is underway, and the future of de-dollarization. I'm maxchernovYT, your insider to Expat Life. Doba. The timing of our call is insane, because that's the US election, obviously, and looks like Trump is winning. That's what we see at this very moment. So if Trump wins, what does it mean for China and for the US itself?
I would say the majority of Chinese people actually would prefer Trump over Kamala Harris. And that might come as very surprising because, it was Donald Trump that back in 2016 started the initial trade war with China, started increasing these tariffs. But one of the interesting things that we've seen, Max, is in the last few years is that these tariffs and these trade restrictions have actually somewhat really backfired on the United States. And it's also really helped China advance many of its own industries. So, for example, in 2016, China really wasn't as much of a dominant player in the auto industry. They were certainly growing. They were certainly becoming definitely a competitor in this space. But now they're producing enough cars to supply over 52% of the world's capacity. They completely dominate the electrical vehicle sector. Now, the United States has come out and said, well, we're going to sanction you, right? We're going to put 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, and we will not let these EVs come into North America. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, there's a protectionist mindset happening with the United States. Donald Trump says, we want to bring all these manufacturing jobs back to America. We need to put all of these tariffs with China. We're going to put 60% tariffs on any goods made from China. So the problem with this is that who does that really hurt? Well, that hurts the American consumer. It doesn't really hurt China, because the reality is that I'm just going to use this cup, for example. This is a, let's just say this is a $25 cup that you can buy at Walmart. Okay, well, this is not being made in America. This is being made in China. But now if you're putting a 60% import cost, well, Walmart's not going to pay that. The company that manufactures is not going to pay that, but now this $25 cup is going to go up to $33.99. So it's the American consumer that's going to have to pay for that difference. So it doesn't really hurt China that much, because the company still has to find where is the best factory in the world that I can make this to maximize my profit. And for the majority of companies, they're still manufacturing in China. Even Apple, in 2024, Apple started sourcing more products from China as opposed to less. They actually purchased less components from Taiwan, the United States, and South Korea. They actually started increasing their buying of local Chinese components because it's the price point, it's the logistics, it's the supply chain, it's the manufacturing. So, I think China is actually, again, they're in a very strong position being the world's factory, being the world's manufacturer. And I think with Trump, he's a little bit more easy to read in the sense that Trump is going to, you can tell exactly what he's going to do. He's going to say something, he's going to do it. And I think with the Kamala and the Democrats, there's a lot of uncertainty there. We don't really know what they're going to say. On one hand, they might say, we support the, one China policy. We want to be friends with you. And then the next week, okay, we're just going to sell $10 billion worth of arms to Taiwan. And guess what? We stand with Taiwan. So it sends a mixed signal to Beijing. They're like, well, do you stand with us? Are you standing with Taiwan? What's your situation here? We don't know how to read the situation. So that's kind of a very stark difference between the two camps. And ultimately, China's going to be China. I mean, they have an incredibly complex country that they're running, 1.4 billion people. They've got a lot of economic issues that they're dealing with, and they're having this transition in their own economy. So they're going to have to figure things out themselves. And, I think it's going to be interesting to see, if these election results stand and, how a potential Trump presidency is going to be for the future.
Why do you think Chinese people like Trump?
I think one of it is that, I've talked to Chinese people about this. I think they actually like him because of, they'll say, he is very American. This is like the typical American, he's loud, he's arrogant, he's he's kind of a very stereotypical kind of New Yorker, he's very, I don't mean that in an offensive way. It's just like, I've heard a lot of Americans say, Donald Trump is the most American president we've ever had. I've also had Chinese people tell me, when Trump says, China's this and China's that and China's this big problem. We kind of understand that. Like, you have to say that because you kind of have to play the game in U.S. politics, right? You're going to have to go on the campaign trail and you're going to have to say certain things to get the vote. And you have this, for example, Donald Trump was all about America first, right? America first. And Chinese people are very rational. Yeah, we get that because in China, we're thinking China first. And as Americans, you should think America first, right? Every country should be concerned about their own country, their own economy, their own national interest. So it is a very, an interesting one, but I think they respect him for that. They also respect him, I think, because he's not a politician, because they say, for example, I was talking to my father-in-law, who's obviously Chinese, and he said, this Trump guy, he really represents the American dream, right? In America, you always hear anybody can be president. If you're born in America, anybody can be the president. And here he is, business guy, really wealthy, just shoots from the hip. He doesn't, no filter. That's Donald Trump. That's America. And there's your president.
Hey guys, just a quick announcement. Don't skip. I'll be running a 3-day workshop called Fast Track to Views and Profits on YouTube. If you ever wanted to start your own channel, this is the best way to do it. You will learn how to choose the most profitable niche and how to beat the YouTube algorithm. You're gonna love it, I promise. Link in description, so sign up if it's for you. And now back to the video. People talk about like this shift, that the global shift that from the West to Asia, and particularly overall to like global South. Why you think it's happening, and is it really happening, or it's like a wishful thinking of like the countries in this global South?
Well, I think what you've seen, Max, is, for example, if we take the continent of Africa, okay, Africa for many decades has been really underutilized, it's been underdeveloped, and it's really been left behind. And what's interesting about Africa is all of us know that Africa is the wealthiest continent in the world. It has absolutely filled with resources. But the problem is that, Western nations have gone in and have really taken advantage of the situation. And for example, let's extract these minerals, let's extract these resources, let's not really do anything for the local people. And, we're going to come and get what we want. And, the rest of it, we don't really care about. And what I liken it to is it's very simple. When you look at China, and there's a reason why, African countries are gravitating towards China. China comes in with very tangible benefits. It's very clear when you do business with China. We're going to give you A in exchange for B. Very simple. China doesn't care what kind of model government you have. You could be a democracy, you could be an authoritarian dictator, you could be a republic, you can be whatever you want to be. Again, we're going to do business, A for B. That's what we're keeping our relationship to. But what's nice is that China comes in and they build tangible assets. You're going to get roads, hospitals, schools, airports, ports, tunnels, railways, any of these things. This is something that largely the United States and Western allies have had an opportunity to build for decades, but they haven't. And the reality is that China is now coming in, they're building this, they're establishing that, and you're starting to see that really transform lives. I think what's very interesting is with this BRICS conference, many of the people that would follow this would be very familiar. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. That's now expanded to 4 other countries. They've now expanded that to another 13 partner countries. But what's interesting is the demand and really the interest. If you go on Twitter and you start following these threads, you start seeing how much engagement people from around the world are saying, hey, I'm from Africa, I love to see BRICS develop. Hey, I'm from Southeast Asia. Hey, I'm from Brazil. I'm from Argentina. I'm from all over the world. We're rooting for BRICS. We're rooting for this to happen. We're rooting for more development, more options. And so, Max, I don't think it's really one of, is BRICS going to control the world? Is BRICS going to, take over the United States? It's not so much that. It's the fact that developing nations now have an option. And if you are a smaller developing nation, I'm going to take, for example, Ethiopia. Let's just say you're developing and what's the best for your future? If I'm the president of Ethiopia, I want to do business with China? Absolutely. Do I want to do business with America? Absolutely. Why would I want to cut off either one of those two? Both of them are great countries. Both of them are great trading partners. So I'm certainly going to do business with both of them. And, now China is a very, very big superpower. They have a lot of assets. a lot of trade, and they're already the number one trading partner with 120 countries around the world. So, I mean, this is definitely the shift, but I think it's a shift towards having more options.
Speaking about BRICS, like compared to G7, before, like people would say, okay, BRICS is more like, let's say, symbolic organization and has no like real legal power compared to G7. You think it's changing now, or maybe it was not the case before?
Well, I think there's definitely been a lot of people that have been very bearish towards the BRICS organization. For example, for many years we heard that, what is the strength of this? Because the people are too diverse, right? Russia and China and India, South Africa. I mean, they're, Brazil. I mean, these 5 countries, they're just so random, if you will. How could they possibly come together and really form a cohesive unit that could really, shift global dynamics? The reality is that they're going to trade when they can. They're going to do business where they can, and where there's opportunities to coexist, they will. Now, the 2 biggest countries in there, in terms of population, of course, are China and India, both around 1.4 billion people in terms of population. Now, for years, there has been a lot of tension. There's been a border conflict between India and China a few years ago that resulted in many casualties where, many soldiers had lost their lives in this skirmish that happened between Indian and Chinese militaries. And during the BRICS summit last month, this was the big thing this is, I think, one of the biggest takeaways is that Modi met with Xi Jinping and they said, look, we need to solve these issues. We're going to agree on establishing a border. We're going to come to that and let's put this issue behind us. And so immediately, that talking point from the West was, well, China and India can't get along together. I mean, how are they going to influence BRICS when they can't even, figure out how to solve a border? Okay, well, now that's been solved. So now they're going to be working together closer. And even Modi had come out and said during his conference that, he wants to have closer relations with China. He's there with Vladimir Putin as well. Obviously, India has benefited tremendously from this war in Ukraine solely from the fact that they're able to buy a ton of Russian oil and gas. They're importing 2 million barrels a day from Russia. And interesting enough, they are using that for their own consumption. They're obviously buying it at a very nice discount. They're a growing economy. They need that oil, but they're also selling it to Europe as well. So, Europe's still buying Russian oil. They're just doing it through India. And so India has seen a very...
So double-sided.
It's so double-sided. It's the same thing. What sucks is to be European and have all of your gas and oil prices go through the roof. And it really affects a country like Germany, which is, really built its manufacturing prowess on cheap gas from Russia. That was that's how they could do it.
This BRICS summit happened in Russia, in Kazan, last month. What are the other big takeaways for you from the summit, apart of this border China-India
the border one was a big one. I think the other one was now having 13 new basically partner countries. So these new countries that have come on, they do not have voting power, but they're essentially a partner country. So they've expanded the alliance. There's a total of 9 key members that are the full BRICS members that do have voting power within the alliance, and then you have 13 additional partner countries. But there's some big ones. Thailand and Malaysia are included in that. Kazakhstan, very big trading partner, from China already into Europe. So I think this is, very symbolic, especially when you have like Malaysia and Thailand. These are very, big growing economies in Southeast Asia. They're expressing their interest. There's been over 50 countries that have expressed interest in, really wanting to attend and at least learn more about BRICS and, certainly send delegates to attend these conferences. But I think the addition of the 13 partner countries is quite a big deal. It's something that we had heard about. And then in addition to that, they're also talking about having this new BRICS trading system. And this is something that a lot of people had speculated on. I even made videos on this before, that there would be a potential new currency. The logistics of actually building and new currency takes many, many years. And that was always kind of a long shot. I think it's now been established that, BRICS will not have their own currency. It will not be backed by gold, but instead they're going to form this trading network where they're going to be using a lot more of their local currencies. And because they're going to be increasing the use of local currencies, that will boost the local economies and, of course, the currencies of each of those members. So again, I think it's a very interesting development. I think it's something that, we should all be paying attention to. Of course, in the Western media, we'll hear, Who cares if they're trading in local currencies? Who cares if they've added 13 new partner countries? The reality is that the US dollar is king, and the G7's where it's at. I think, again, I'm not trying to discredit the G7. I think it's obviously a powerful alliance. The US dollar is a very powerful currency. But again, it's about countries having options. And that's really what I think is very symbolic of this multipolar world that we live in.
Speaking about this new BRICS countries, interestingly, like Thailand and Malaysia, there are two countries that I would say most often from Singapore.
Right.
And for me, it's also, I'm curious, like how Singapore will be positioned in the future, because Singapore is like typically try to balance between like the West and the East, and being like a safe haven for all of the powers in the world.
I saved an article that I read about 2 months ago that actually had that talked about Singapore building much closer relations with China, and obviously there's a lot of Chinese people in Singapore. There's a lot of Chinese immigrants that have immigrated to Singapore. They're very objective as well. I think when you're looking right now is you're looking for, I'm linking it to this. The 21st century is Asia's century. We know this. That's not an opinion. That's a fact. The future of this world for the next 75 years, is going to be in Asia. India is going to rise to become a very, you think about, let's go to 2100, 75 years from now, how is the world going to look? India is going to be much more powerful. Still the majority of the world's population is going to be in Asia. But, you look at, you live in Singapore, Max. We spend a lot of time, both of us, traveling throughout Asia. You look at the technology, the population, what's really coming out of Asia. I think many ways Asia really is already living in the future. And so I think it's going to continue that way. And I think what you're looking for is who's going to have the regional hegemony, right? And it's something that the United States definitely would like to have, because, let's be honest, the United States wants hegemony in every corner of the globe. The U.S. government wants to be the boss everywhere, and every single, corner of the globe, they want to be number one. But I think what's interesting is with this shift, in why do I think the border deal with India and China is such a big thing? Well, BRICS actually has a very good chance at becoming that regional hegemonic power, because already it has India and China in the mix. Now you add in Thailand, Malaysia, the two of the fastest growing economies, they're starting to really have a lot of influence in there. And again, Thailand's going to have great relations with the United States. There's not an issue there. They're going to continue doing trade, but they're definitely very curious about, how do we get closer with India and China? These are our neighbors. We're all in Asia together. Let's definitely do more business together. And I'll give you one other thing that I can show you. I'll send you the graph later, but it's the ASEAN is a group of 10 Asian countries. So when the United States wants to decouple and they say, hey, we're not going to buy your manufacturing goods anymore. Well, the U.S. can't really decouple that much from China. Even, top economists say if we try our best, maybe we can reduce by 10%. It's just, we're too interconnected. But the reality is that China has started shifting its exports. Majority of exports are now going to the Asian region already. So that's been a huge increase over the last decade or so, where they have really started to export a lot more to their local neighbors, as opposed to really relying exclusively on that U.S. So there's always a debate of who needs who more. Does the U.S. need China more? Does China need the U.S. more? And, again, I'm on the point where I think they both need each other a lot. But I think that China has done a very good job of, building up its own domestic industries and also building up those relationships with its local trading partners in Asia.
The crazy thing, I tried to Google the news in the so-called Western media about BRICS Summit. It's almost nothing.
That's very much, it's just not going to align with what Western media wants to promote. And again, this kind of goes, we're going to coming full circle here where, why do I speak, objectively about China? Why do I share things? Why do I make videos about China? Well, because if you actually dig through the numbers and you dig through the data, there's a lot of interesting stories to be told about China. We've made full video breakdowns, for example, exploring China's relationship in Africa. We've made, China's relationship in South America. I've got video clips of these African leaders, comparing, well, this is how the United States government treats me, and this is how China treats me. And again, so when people say, Cyrus, you're so biased, it's really hard, because if you watch my videos, I use facts and I use logic. And I said, well, you can disagree with my opinion about China and Africa, but I'm sourcing African sources. I'm sourcing video clips from African leaders that are attending these conferences. So it's not so much my information, it's really their information. I'm just the one that puts it in a video and kind of tells you, hey, here's the other side of the story that, guess what, you're not going to see on the New York Times or CNBC or Fox News or anything like that. I made a full breakdown on Huawei, and I had so many people comment on that. This story is terrible. You're so biased for China. And I said, oh, by the way, my entire source for this video was the Wall Street Journal. And the Wall Street Journal actually published a really good article that said the U.S. tried to assassinate Huawei. It has backfired. And I said, wow, this is a really interesting one, because every now and then you get these objective pieces, but of course, people don't pay attention to that. And so, the reason I want to make a video about it is because I guarantee you not many people heard that story, and it gets lost in this constant shuffle of daily news. But every now and then you do have some gold pieces, some real gems from Western media and it's usually opinion pieces, because it's people that are in the business world and that are connected. And I think that's where what I always like to say is, you need to remove yourself from the politicians, because they're going to say what they need to say to get those votes. Again, kind of going back to that Donald Trump thing, he's going to say, you know what, China's our greatest enemy. I'm going to talk to Xi Jinping tough, and I'm going to sit him down, because that's what Americans want to hear. Yeah, that's right. Xi Jinping's our enemy. Like, sit him down. You tell him who's boss. He's going to play into your emotions. And I mean, that's very much an emotional game when we're talking about elections, when we're talking about, even Western media, for example, right? How are we going to have this headline? We need to create some fear. We need to create some urgency. So that's exactly what they're doing.
We'll put the links for our audience to the videos that you mentioned, so you guys go check it out. Also, like, Cyrus' channel is amazing. If you don't know the channel yet, you should definitely take a look. Speaking of the relationships between China and Russia, they are it seems like they're getting closer, or like closer friends. Do you think it's just like a strategic move from China to get like cheaper resources from Russia, or you see really some shift in the relationships? Because China and Russia, they were always, I would call them friends, or like, especially on the political level, on the country level, as the same as Russia and India. But what do you think now happening with the relationships between these two countries?
And I think there's definitely been a greater opportunity, since this recent invasion in, early 2022. There's definitely been a opportunity to export more goods to Russia. I think the Chinese exports to Russia has increased by, maybe 4 times, maybe fourfold, since the beginning of 2022.
If you go to Moscow now, before you would see like any types of cars, a lot of like European mainly cars. Right. Now it's like 60-70% is Chinese cars.
Yes.
Which is insane.
Yeah, I mean, very quick transition. And, obviously a lot of that is because of the war and sanctions. But again, it's also the fact that, Chinese EVs are taking over. I mean, that's the same thing when you go to Brazil now and you go throughout South America. I mean, there's many countries that are very happy to start, importing these Chinese EVs, because they're at an amazing price point and they are, life-changing. When you can buy a fantastic car for $10,000, that's a great price point, and that's going to really shift things a lot. But I think as far as, China and Russia, I think that it's been very interesting to watch China. I mean, they have not been a full supporter of this, escalation in Ukraine and really this conflict. I mean, I do think that even you did see that Putin and Xi Jinping did meet, early 2022. That was just around the Beijing Olympics. Remember, Beijing was hosting the Olympics. Vladimir Putin did go to Beijing to attend the opening ceremony. And then, almost a couple weeks after, that's when this recent invasion happened. But I think that actually did catch Beijing off guard. I don't think that Xi Jinping, knew exactly what he was doing. I don't think that, he had disclosed that to him at the Beijing Olympics, for example. Hey, I'm about to do this big move. Do you have my back? Are you going to support me? So, I mean, the interesting thing is that, China does have good relations with Ukraine as well. And they do a lot of trade with Ukraine. So it's China's always in this position of trying how do we solve these issues, right? How do we figure this out diplomatically? I mean, you can look at that where they call for a two-state solution with Israel-Palestine. They had brokered a big deal between Iraq and Iran, trying to negotiate a peace deal as well. So, I mean, I do think that this is they're walking a very tightrope, if you will, with Russia. I mean, because they want to maintain a good relationship, but they're not going to 100% support everything that Putin's doing.
I will not be surprised if China will start, like after the war is over, China will be heavily investing in Ukraine economy because they see a lot of potential there. I think China
100%.
is very pragmatic on this sense.
China is very pragmatic, very, very much. And I think that's, there's going to be a big opportunity to rebuild Ukraine. And certainly, I mean, if you're Ukraine, why wouldn't you get China in there and building? I mean, who builds it better than China and faster and more efficient? So, I mean, I think it'd be, great for Ukraine to do that. I think China will be there. And I think, it's great to have options. I think that's the one thing we've said a lot in this episode. I think that, for Ukraine, they're certainly going to get a lot of more aid from the West. And I think, hopefully they can rebuild. And I think it'd be great if China was there.
You mentioned the term, the de-dollarization. Do you think it will really happen in some near future? Or it's more like the talks for now?
I think we're seeing a lot of de-dollarization in the sense of, countries no longer want to be exclusively holding US dollars, right? As we know from Investing 101, right? You want to have a diversified portfolio. Apple stock has been a great stock, but you wouldn't want to put all of your money in one stock, right? You want to have, as great as Apple is, you don't want to just invest only in one company, right? You want to invest in many companies and you want to have that diversified portfolio. So I think with the issue is that we've seen, the problem is the United States government has increased sanctions tremendously over the past, 4 presidencies. We've seen, Barack Obama was the first president that he passed around 1,000 sanctions a year, every year he was in office. Donald Trump became the next president who, increased that to 2,000 sanctions. And then, Biden came in and increased that to 3,000 sanctions a year. So there's a lot more sanctions happening from the U.S. government. And, this has been a lot of warning signs from U.S. policymakers as well. Hey, we're using these sanctions too much. If we use them too much, they really lose their effectiveness and it's going to have an adverse effect. And that adverse effect is that now countries are saying, you know what, if I have all of my foreign currency reserves in dollar, if we don't align with the US government, they can cut us off from SWIFT. They can make our lives very, very difficult in a heartbeat. And I think people don't want to be exposed to that. And it's the same thing where you look at deals like India and China, they're making deals in their local currencies. I think 95% of the trade between Russia and China is done in their local currencies. They're not using US dollars anymore. They're not using that. So, you are seeing de-dollarization. Now, do I see a world in the future where, the US dollar is going to collapse? It's going to lose all of its value? Put it all in Bitcoin? No, I don't see that. I still think that the US dollar, the thing about it is that it is a currency of, for the majority of the world, people still trust it. If you bring US dollars anywhere in the world, you're going to be able to use them for the most part. So I think, we're not going to see this de-dollarization, in the next 1 year, 2 years, but you're starting to see again a shift towards options, and this is why you're seeing, I think it's 80% of central banks around the world are buying a lot of gold. Gold has been at an all-time high for over the last 12 months. So, you've seen, again, why do people hold gold? Well, because you hold gold because it's a hard asset that doesn't lose value, and when you're worried about dollar and, that value, you put it in gold because if you're holding that physical gold, then, it hedges inflation. So I think that's where you're seeing, why has gold been at a very all-time high? It is because of these geopolitical tensions around the world, and it is because of central banks buying a lot of gold.
Some people say you are too positive or about China or too one-sided. Can you name what's the biggest issues in China at the moment?
I think there's a plethora of issues right now in China. There's no doubt about it that China is experiencing an economic downturn right now. We look at the unemployment, especially amongst the youth in China. This is a very big issue. It's over 20%. I think that you look at the real estate market. This is something that is undergoing a very big transition. For example, when I first moved to China in 2007, 2007, the real estate market was growing exponentially. I actually purchased a home in China in 2009. I was able to sell that several years later. But this was a time where, you could buy real estate really to speculate. You could buy real estate with the intention that it's going to go up in a lot of value. You're going to be able to make some good money on that return. And as things happen in real estate market, very similar to what we saw in the United States in 2008, 2009, where people started becoming very, very aggressive, buying many houses, trying to flip as many times as possible. And then the entire real estate market collapsed. And that was the financial crisis that we saw, led by the United States. So I think what now is, you've seen China's government come out and say, look, we don't want you to speculate on housing anymore. That's not going to be something that you're going to do. You buy a house, you go live in it. And so you're going to see real estate prices start to come down. So I think people that were caught, speculating and trying to flip houses, they've lost a lot of money. And I think there's a lot of issues in China as far as the economics. But I think that there's also, when you actually go to China, I spent 2 months this summer on the ground traveling in China. There is still a lot of optimism. I still think that there is, for example, we were there for 2 months. Every single restaurant is completely filled. Coffee shops are filled, bars are filled. It's not like there's a huge economic downturn where no one's doing anything and everybody's suffering. It's more of a shift. And I think what we're seeing is, for example, my best example I can give you, 2007, China's economy grew by 14%, right? It's an astronomical growth, for a country like that. Well, certainly now it's 2024. China's economy is much larger than it was in 2007. So, it's projected to grow 5% this year. Now, 5% for China is a relatively low number, but compared to Western countries, it's actually very high. And, again, it's a maturing of a market. So again, I still think that there's many good opportunities. You look at certainly in industries like AI, electric vehicles, there's still opportunities. So I do tend to be very positive because I'm much more of an optimist. I'm always try to look for the positive in everything. When that doesn't matter if I'm looking at China or the United States or Russia or Europe or anywhere in the world. I'm trying to figure out what is the positive and how do we work together. I think the interesting thing is that we live in a very polarized world. If you look at really any major issue in the United States, right? It's, you talk about gun laws, abortion, immigration, it's a 50-50 split. So we live in this polarized world. So now we talk about China and we talk about the fact that, for many people, they look at China in a very negative light. And the reality is that the vast majority of the world doesn't. The majority of the world looks at China in a much more positive light. You certainly look at that in other countries around the world. Africa, the entire continent of Africa, the 53 countries there. You look at South America, you look at Southeast Asia, you look at the Middle East, you certainly look at other countries in Asia. There's a much different viewpoint than what we see in typical Western media. There's always this thought that, America is a good guy because we're a democracy and China's a bad guy because it's autocracy. But there's a lot more nuance to that. And what I really wanted to really convey in our interview is just that you need to go to China and experience it for yourself. Because I see so many people that have this opinion about China and they've never spent a single day in the country. And the simple reality is like I said in that interview, if you actually go to China and you experience it, you're going to come away with a much different perspective than what's presented to you in Western media. So maybe you don't like the content that I make. That's fine. I have no problem with people, liking it or not liking it. But what I do hope is that you do at least go to China and try it and see it for yourself. And like I said, I think you're going to come away with a very different perception of what you probably thought of before.
And what's your view on the next 5-10 years of the world?
The message that I always preach, Max, is that we have to find a way to coexist. And there is no option for a hot war, between the U.S. and China. That option is the end of mankind. That's the end of the world. So I am optimistic in the sense that I do think that at the end of the day, U.S. leaders and Chinese leaders both understand that. I think that there is sometimes these escalations or these calls for escalation where people want, a lot of Chinese people even are saying, hey, we should be more aggressive towards the United States, or the U.S. saying, hey, we should be more aggressive to China. The truth is we need to find a way that we can coexist. We need to find a way that that the U.S. and China can work together, because the rest of the world depends on that. right? If a U.S. and China relationship is good, everybody in the world basically wins as a result of that. It's the most important geopolitical relationship in the world. So it's something that I follow all the time. It's something that I built a YouTube channel about, constantly talking about U.S.-China relations. But it really starts with just people being more objective about China and, trying to find a way to promote this partnership, because we have been great partners for over 50 years. The United States, quite frankly, has gotten extremely wealthy off of China over the last 50 years. And, China has gotten very wealthy because of U.S. investment. And so, again, almost always you can kind of see this two-way street where both parties are really working together, they're benefiting together, the citizens are benefiting. Both American and Chinese citizens have benefited tremendously over a 50-year fruitful relationship. And I think it's something that we need more of, and we need to continue. And so my hope is that for the next 5-10 years, obviously I want to see this, Russia-Ukraine conflict be solved. I'd like to see peace in the Middle East. I'd like to see, better relations, really kind of going back in time. When I was first in China, 2007, 2008, U.S.-China relations was at an all-time high. It was great. It was fantastic. And trade was booming, and it's something that I think would be great for the world. So that's something that I'm definitely hope for, and it's definitely something that I will be continuing to preach here on YouTube.